It's the final week of the month, you know what that means. It's style study time. And today's video is for all of you guys who love that super dynamic, action-packed style of comic books and just the Marvel and DC universes in general. Because today we are looking at the incredible character art of Gretel Lusky, aka GRET LUSKY. Today's video has been requested twice, so thanks so much to Cell9188 and Crystal Lewis81 for requesting this video. I've loved Gret's work for so long and I'm so glad you requested it, and I truly hope it's everything you've been looking for. Now, if this is your very first style study, hi, welcome. My name is Srish and I'm so glad you're here because today we're gonna level up your art by like 1,000,000%. Style study is a regular series we do here on my channel where we take a look at some of our favorite contemporary artists, analyze their work and see what we can learn from it. Keyword learn. We're not here to plagiarize anyone's work or copy their style. We're simply here to learn some really cool art tips and tricks and see how we can apply them to finding our own unique art style. I usually structure my style studies in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll take a look at Gret's work, analyze her style and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of her original paintings. The incredible and extremely challenging reference I chose today was this one. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to an original painting of our own. And you guys, this might be one of my absolute favorite originals because it was yummy, so stick around for that one. If you enjoyed this video and learned something today, make sure to like and subscribe. Comment below your biggest takeaway from this study and come say hello on socials. All my links are in the video description. And now, if you're ready, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring GRET LUSKY. Gretel Lusky is a mixed media comic artist and illustrator from Argentina, though she is currently based in the UK. She started her journey working as a viz dev artist and character designer in the animation industry before pivoting to work in comics. She is currently known for her incredible, dynamic character pieces that combine the classic comic book art style with her own magical elements, and boy does that make for a potent mix. Gret has previously worked with both DC and Marvel, IDW's project called Marvel Action, as well as other industry giants like Archie, Titan, Disney, and Lucasfilm, among many, many others. She even had an art book published with 3D Total in 2023, and even just the cover image is absolutely stunning. Gret's beautiful art has garnered her over 952,000 followers on Instagram and over 661,000 subscribers here on YouTube. Like we've seen, Gret's art is incredibly dynamic and colourful, with a strong comic book influence baked in at the very core of each painting. There's a lot of movement, a lot of very vibrant, saturated colours, the kind of beautiful chaos that keeps your eye darting across the scene for a very long time. There are so many tiny design elements scattered across the entire composition that make it look ethereal and borderline holographic. It's like her work has an inbuilt sense of glist. It is a word in the Scottish dialect, and no, I am not running out of list puns, but speaking of lists, here are 4 key characteristics to GRET LUSKY's art. The least obvious but arguably most impactful aspect of Gret's work is the extremely high readability. If you've never come across the term before, the readability of a painting is essentially how easy it is for you to understand the subject and story of it at a quick glance. And Gretel's art is an excellent example of very high readability because just one look at her paintings tells you everything you need to know about the character and the scene as a whole. Like here, you can immediately tell this is Galinda and Elphaba in that popular song without even needing to read the speech bubble. This is clearly a sort of elven fairy character who probably comes from medieval times. You can tell by her wings, ear, and clothes. But it's not just the clear and simplified features of the character that enhance the readability, but also the clarity and simplification of the design choices. There is a visible separation between the various elements in the scene, and this comes from 3 specific details. The first is, of course, the line art. Very strong, continuous, and clean lines define pretty much every important edge on the character, and these lines are often much darker than the values that surround them. Like in this painting here, you see the dark, very visible lines that separate the face from the body from the hair from the bow, and the character from the clouds in the background. You may not notice every line immediately, but you definitely notice the separation between the different elements. The second detail is the value separation, especially near these dividing lines. Adjacent values will usually be very different to each other. Like here, the value of her clothing is much darker than the skin or the hair, and the silhouette is bright against a dark background. In fact, in parts of the silhouette that might be too dark to stand out against the dark background, Gretel throws in a bright rim light to separate the two. The third detail is the colors. She generally uses very visibly different colors for distinctly different elements. Like here, the pumpkin is very orange, the skin has paler peachy tones, the t-shirt is pink and yellow, and the jeans are blue. Or here, where the hair is pink and purple, the skin is peachy, and the dress is yellow. There's also some turquoise on the sword. It's not always that Gretel uses all 3 of these aspects for readability. Sometimes she'll use either value or colors, but there's always line art. She keeps a lot of that shading fairly flat though, and any blending usually stays within each compositional element, rather than blending, say, skin into hair or hair into clothes. There's pretty much no lost edges. All of these design choices, when put together, mean that you can look at one of Gretel's paintings and immediately know exactly what's going on. It makes the story super fast-paced, which is a great attribute for comic book art. Okay, I've said it multiple times now, but Gretel loves her vibrant colors. There are a lot of colors in her work that are very highly saturated, and it's not just one hero color with other lower saturation colors to complement it, like you hear in good art advice. No, Gretel actually saturates multiple colors across the painting, and it actually has a paradoxical effect in that it makes everything more harmonious and balanced. Because everything is highly saturated, it's like no single color stands out in particular. We usually think of contrast in terms of value, right? But if we think of contrast between high and low saturation, Gretel's work is actually fairly low contrast. One of my favorite artists is Jess Wathen, and he paints these animals and bird portraits, but he sometimes does this thing where he'll paint a mostly grey piece and then hit it with this neon pink, for instance. Now, in terms of saturation, that is a very high contrast, and as a result, that pink stands out loud and clear and catches your eye immediately. But take a look at this painting by Gretel. See how much saturation you have in the blues, pinks, yellows, purples, and even the greens. Now, because all of it is so saturated, no one color stands out in particular. There is a low saturation contrast here, making the painting feel a lot more visually quiet and gentle. Let's look at the individual colors themselves now though. Gretel often paints her characters to have unnatural hair colors. You'll see lots of pinks, blues, and greens in the hair. Sometimes even the skin is an unnatural color, like this character who has teal skin. In characters with human-looking skin though, you'll often see a deep, saturated tone at the cheeks and the nose. It is a very noticeably red tone that stands out from the rest of the skin. And you'll also often see this redness at the joints, such as the shoulders, elbows, and knees, as well as in the occlusion shadows of the skin. In characters with unnatural skin tones, this comes across as just a deeper, more saturated color in these same areas, but in either case, it is a really cool way to make the skin look more transparent and add a lot of color variation to the face and body without creating too much value drama. The hair usually has a fair bit of color variation as well. Sometimes there's ombre colors where the root and mid-length are one color while the ends are a different, usually lighter color. Man, I should really dye my hair again. Anyway, you also see these flat, glossy highlights, usually at the bumpiest parts of the hair. Imagine a string of Batman logos right around the crown of the head, but also at the crests of the waves in the longer hair. It is a classic comic book trait that shows shine in the hair without actually painting lots of realistic texture. In either case though, the values in the hair are very simplified as well, in that all the shadows and highlights tend to have hard edges, and any soft blends are usually due to a change in the hair color as opposed to change in value. Really, the key here is to simplify that value rendering as much as possible, and this again goes back to enhancing what? That's right, the readability. In terms of the facial anatomy, Gretel stylizes her characters a lot, but it doesn't look super extreme. So you do have large eyes, but they're not like manga levels of large and round, and they're pretty much bang on in the center of the face vertically, not super low on the head like in, say, Ross Tran's work. Also, they usually have a winged eyeliner of some kind, often with very visible lower lashes, at least in the prettier, more feminine characters. The nose, however, tends to be a lot lower down on the head. She doesn't minimize it a lot, but the nose is definitely stylized to be all cute and upturned. The lips are generally full and pouty, and it is at this point of the script I realize Gretel is also a left-handed queen. Hell yeah! Us lefties need more representation, because why are scissors so hard to use? Anyway, the lips are usually a noticeably deeper tone than the rest of the skin and tend to have a nice specular highlight on the lower lip that makes them look glossy. The jaw tends to be quite soft and the chin rather rounded and narrow, but never super pointy. What's really interesting though is that her characters always have some sort of visible expression in the face. This cover is actually my favorite example of this, because you have three characters with very loud, very distinctive facial expressions, right? But what caught my eye was these little circles here. See how even in these super simplified versions of their faces, they still have very distinctive expressions in the face. There's always a lot of character in the face, and I feel like it really enhances the dynamic nature of these illustrations, because it's not just these static mannequins posed for an image. These faces are very much alive and packed full with personality, and more often than not, they're in the middle of fast-paced action or some sort of dramatic scene. These expressions may be loud, like with Vi here, where the brows are really pulled down into the eye socket and the mouth is twisted with visibly gritted teeth, or with this character here where the eyes are large, one eyebrow raised, and the mouth is in a big open smile. Or it could be a little more subtle, like with Bloom here, where you have a little turn up of the eyebrows in the middle and a tight-lipped smile, or even subtler Elphaba here with the droopy eyelids and slight grimace that make her look bored or unimpressed. Such a mood. The point is, these characters are never serving a dead, boring face. There's always a lot they convey through their expression alone. Alright, this is what really ties up Gret's paintings into a unique, noticeable style. It's all the little boom pow comic book details that just hit so hard. And I noticed that there are 4 very specific extra details that she paints into her work, so let's go through them in turn. The first is the hatching. This is usually limited to the character, but you'll often see these short parallel lines that add a bit of texture in areas of shadow or plane shifts. So in the cheek, for instance, or the nose bridge, maybe a little under the eye even. You'll also see hatching in the clothing sometimes, but my favorite is when she uses it to show shadow without showing shadow. Like here, see how these textures in the hair right next to her neck, and also in the penumbra of the shadow on her actual neck? It's like she uses these lines to show where a shadow would go, but chooses these lines instead of painting an actual shadow tone there. I feel like not only does it keep the color palette in that area from becoming too dark and dramatic, it also breaks up those large flat shapes without adding too much noise, because the lines are parallel. It's like different to the surrounding shapes, but still uniform enough to not cause too much disturbance. Then there's your classic screen tone dots. Of course, this is in her digital paintings as opposed to the traditional sketchbook ones, but you'll see these really noticeable screen tone textures littered randomly across the piece, sometimes in place of those hatched lines, other times just on the character, and some larger ones in the background. Again, adding lots of interest, but also that authentic comic book feel. The third detail is stars, starbursts, and other random symbols like hearts and circles scattered around the background. Sometimes you even see them on characters' skin and jewelry, but it kind of gives you that cutesy bubblegum pop vibe. I literally don't know how to explain it better, but think of Katy Perry's California Girls music video. That's the vibe I get. And the final detail is chromatic aberration, that red and blue glitch you see around some of the edges. Again, that is more in her digital pieces than the traditional ones, but it adds an interesting effect, kind of making you think you're glitching out or moving so fast that the colors around the edges are splitting into their primary components. Again, pushing a sense of vibrance and energy. It's a really cool effect, and in fact, every one of these details further enhances the primary component, the primary purpose even, of every single one of Gretel's paintings, and that is dynamism. So, to sum up part 1 of this study, here are 4 key characteristics to Gretel Lusky's art. Number 1, she paints every piece to have very high readability, be it through the line art, the value contrast, or how flat the shading is. This allows the viewer to quickly figure out what's going on in the scene at a single glance. 2, Gret uses extremely vibrant colors that are very saturated, but because everything is so saturated, no particular color stands out. As a result, the palette actually ends up looking rather harmonious. 3, the anatomy is stylized to make the characters look more feminine and appealing, but not too much. However, each character has a noticeable facial expression that makes them look alive, as opposed to lifeless mannequins in a pretty palette. And number 4, Gret uses extra little design details such as hatching, screen tones, and stars to add even more noise and movement to the piece, further enhancing the dynamism. Okay, let's get into some actual painting. For our study today, this is the reference I chose. She's gorgeous, has a lot of elements that are characteristic to Gret's art, and there's also that expression I really wanted to try and capture, like she's already annoyed at you. I started with a sketch, as always, super rough at this stage, just getting down the relative size of everything. Also, it was at this stage that I truly grasped how exaggerated the facial features really are, but you don't realize it at all because the lines are so delicate and the rendering is relatively flat. It's only because of these messy, thick, sketchy lines that you can tell how far removed these proportions are from realism. Isn't that so interesting? Anyway, I colored the sketch red, lowered the opacity, and started the inks on a new layer. And arguably, this was the longest, most intricate part of the process, at least for the study. You know I tried to be as close to the original as possible, meaning I was really trying to replicate every single line that she painted. And let me just say, the shapes in her eyes were very tricky. Not only because they're stylized, but also because of the angle of the head. And because there is really no blending or shading, these lines alone are responsible for the shape and form of the eyes. So it was definitely a challenge. The nose and mouth were relatively straightforward, though I did have to redo the curves of her mouth a lot just to try and get the angles right in one confident brush stroke. That mouth is a super important aspect of her facial expression here, so we really want to try and nail it at this stage. Inking her hair, body, clothing and jewelry was easy enough. These are pretty standard shapes, not too much stylization, apart from, well, it's all rendered with flat colors, but like the relative shapes and sizes we draw in these elements would pretty much also apply to a realistic character. So yeah, these lines were fairly straightforward, though we will color over some of them later. Now, the sword was in perspective, and that caught me by surprise. Like, I didn't even consider perspective when looking at this style because so much of it is flat and two-dimensional, but the perspective is so subtle you don't even clock the three-dimensionality of it until it gets to something like this. I also went around and inked all the background elements in because most of them have noticeable lines, and I figured if I got all the inks out of the way now, the rest of the process would go by much quicker, and I was right. From this point forward, the remainder of this piece went by much quicker and much more smoothly. I started, of course, by establishing a color palette to pick from. Since Gretel uses a lot of bright, saturated colors, this was actually an interesting process. Like we saw in part 1, pretty much every color is vibrant and saturated, but what that does is trick our eyes. We sort of don't see how intense any individual color is because it is tempered by another equally intense color right next to it. So establishing this palette was really helpful because I could just color pick from it with the eyedropper tool, and that way I wasn't accidentally muting some of those colors due to my own brain's perception. Also, for the flats, I used a lasso select tool to paint every element onto its own layer. Remember, we want very clean edges because those lines give us our dramatic silhouette, and there aren't any lost edges in her work at all, where the character might blend into the background, none of that. In fact, even that core shadow in her face and neck is flat and hard-edged. Like, yeah, there's a very subtle color variation within it, but the edge is clean and sharp. The only place you really see blending of values in the face is in the redness of her cheek and around her nose. You definitely see more blending in the hair though, because for one, you have a blue to pink gradient in the base tones of her hair, but you also see just a little bit of a softer shadow right at the top of the head. Every other shadow is super hard-edged, and it's just a slightly deeper version of the surrounding hair color. So the shadows in the blue area are a deeper blue, the shadows in the purple areas are a deeper purple. Not too much deeper, but they are distinct and hard-edged. The shadows in her dress are rendered the same way. You just have two colors that are slightly darker than the main yellow, and one of the shadow tones is just a little bit warmer than the other. But again, the edges are clean and hard. The colors of the background elements echo the colors in our character, meaning I could just color pick from the same palette that we made earlier. It creates harmony between the character and the background, but without the character blending into the background entirely. I also went ahead and painted this super bright pale blue rim light on her hair, again more flat hard-edged shapes. Finally, let's look at the tiny elements, the stars and the dots. I ended up having to customize some brushes to get like a string of flat circles. I basically just grabbed my ink brush and increased the spacing so it put gaps between adjacent stamps of the brush. For the screen tone, I used some brush from a pack that I had downloaded ages ago, though it wasn't as customizable and user-friendly as I would have liked. For the original painting in part 3, I ended up using a different pack, but for now, this worked well enough. There's actually a variation in the size of the dots, so I definitely needed to change the scale of the pattern, but it was so much fun to mess around with the dots, you guys. Oh, also the freckles. Oh, yep, the freckles are a super key detail. Pretty much every one of Gret's characters have some freckles around the nose area, sometimes even drawn out over the cheeks. I did a bit of liquify to fix the face and basically faked the chromatic aberration by duplicating and recoloring the lines. We'll do a proper one for the original piece, but I wanted a little more control over it with the study. Alright, the very final detail, those super light scribbles in the background. It was so hard to find a texture brush that would give me those perfectly tiled scribbles. I tried with a bunch of hatching brushes, messed with their dynamics, nothing worked. I ended up just finding a texture on Free Pick, I think, and pasting that in instead. I duplicated it, recolored it a pale peachy tone, and that worked perfectly. You guys, I love how the study turned out. It's not a perfect replica, but as a standalone piece, so beautiful with all those details. Okay, so while looking for inspiration for the original painting, I came across this photo on Pinterest, and it turns out it's a photo of this model and actress, Xiao Wenzhe. I think that's how you say it. But something about this image felt so deeply rooted in self-love and luxury, and I couldn't help but study it, but in Gret style. Turns out it's really fun to ink a sketch when you're not obsessing over replicating every single line. But again, we're going to use a gentle hand so the proportions don't look insanely exaggerated, even if they are. After the initial lines that define and separate all the elements, I went in and blocked a drop shadow under her face and added in some texture lines in her hair to sort of indicate the direction in which the strands were flowing. I actually went kind of basic with the color palette. In retrospect, I could have gone way more vibrant and saturated, but because this is a digital painting, we can always go back and vibe it up later. For now, I made sure to, again, keep the edges very clean and hard. Remember, we want the lines to be neat and defined. In fact, I even did the highlights on their own layers, flattening them in with a sharp edge. That way I don't accidentally blend the edges that I don't want to. I also did this for the hard-edged shadows in the face, still super low contrast, but I just wanted her to have a little more bone structure in like the eye socket and temples. I also separated the highlights for her clothing on their own layer for the exact same reason. Ooh, so one of my favorite parts of this process was making these boom pow highlights in the hair. You know this shape that you see in comics? All I did was make one large flat shape in the middle of the section of hair, and then with a round eraser, cut little semicircles out of the silhouette. And that quickly gives you that continuous Batman shape without having to paint all those curves by hand. I did that for all of the sections of her hair, and remember, this is a highlight. It's going to show up at the highest point of the section, which is at the bumpiest bit. So wherever you place it, it's going to look like that part of the hair is pushed out towards you. Just something to keep in mind if you try it for yourself. I added some warmth to her skin, but being mindful to not lose any of those edges that we've so carefully painted. And now we get to do the best part of this style, the little comic book details. Like I said, this time I downloaded a different set of screen tone textures and pretty much just applied it as a pattern to a basic hard round brush. Just being able to scale the pattern up and down really helped with switching up the size of the dots. Remember, we're looking for larger dots in the fabric, smaller ones in the skin, and we definitely want to color match these dots to the surrounding tones. I also gave her lots of freckles at the nose. It's so cute. I pasted in a wallpaper texture to quickly populate the background, and I also changed the color of her hair to a sort of greeny brown. This just suits her so much better. I threw in some chromatic aberration with a filter, and then also just painted some behind her to sort of really push the silhouette. I then grabbed the aberration colors and painted even more screen tones, some stars for the background, and finally switched up the background colors a little, and oh my god, I love how this turned out. It's gotta be the coolest thing I've ever painted, you guys. What do you think? And there we have it, GRET LUSKY demystified. And holy guacamole, you guys, this study was so much fun. I love all the little details, that screen tone stuff, so cool. But what was your biggest takeaway from this study? What are you gonna take forward into creating your own art style? Comment below and let me know. Thanks so much again to Cell9188 and Crystal Lewis81 for requesting this video. I truly hope you guys both enjoyed it and that it was everything you were hoping for. And if the rest of you guys have enjoyed this video as well, let me know by giving it a big thumbs up. And if you have the ability to, you can now hype my videos and that will help more people find it as well. So if you could do that, that would be awesome. Thank you. Subscribing to my channel is a wonderful way to support my work and buying me a coffee as well. But my OGs know that the best way to do it and grab lots of art rewards as well is to check out my Patreon. I post real-time, super niche, very detailed art tutorials on there that go into so much detail that I can't go into on the YouTube videos. And there's also other rewards such as my complete custom brush kit for Critter and Photoshop, prints of my work every few months. I think a print went out this month even, as well as all the art rewards, all the speed paints from start to finish, the step-by-step process, and everything I put out. It's all on Patreon. I will leave a link up here and in the description. Come support your girl. Help me buy some actual real plants, because that's fake. Finally, are there any other artists you'd like to see a style study on in the future? First, check out my style study playlist. It should show up here in just a sec. I've done so many of these, you guys, and chances are I've probably covered some of your faves on the series already. But if I haven't, feel free to leave me a comment below and let me know whom you'd like to see a style study on in the future. Or you can come tell me on my Discord server. Link to that is in the video description, and I'll be more than happy to add your artist to my ever-growing list. And that's everything for today. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I truly hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out the rest of the style study playlist here in the outro, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!